Honesty is not courage.
You were told that emotional honesty makes you strong, that being open with people builds trust, that speaking your truth creates respect, that vulnerability is courage. You believed it. You practiced it. You became the person who says what they feel, the one who doesn't hide their emotions, the one who believes that transparency builds connection. And it did build connection. People like you for it. They appreciated your openness. They valued your honesty. They called you real. But something else happened that no one mentioned. You became easy to read, not just understood, mapped. When people know how you feel, they stop wondering what you'll do. They stop calculating. They stop preparing. They stop adjusting their behavior to account for uncertainty. They know where you stand, which means they know where to place you. Honesty doesn't make you brave. It makes you reachable. Think about the first few weeks at a new job. You don't know the culture yet. You don't know who has real authority. You don't know which conflicts matter and which ones are theater. So you watch. You stay neutral. You keep your opinions close. You observe how decisions actually get made. And during those weeks, people pay attention to you differently. They're cautious. They're curious. They adjust their tone when they speak to you because they don't know what you think yet. Then you start being honest. You share your perspective in meetings. You're open about what frustrates you. You let people know how you feel about changes, about leadership, about the direction things are going. And people relax. Not because they trust you more, because they've placed you. They know your limits now. They know what bothers you. They know what you'll accept and what you'll push back on. You're no longer a variable. You're a known quantity. The attention shifts. Not away from you entirely, but it changes shape. People still listen when you speak, but they've already decided how much weight to give your words before you finish saying them. You thought being real would make you harder to dismiss. It made you easier to manage. Because emotional honesty doesn't create leverage. It creates familiarity. And familiarity is not the same as respect. Respect comes from uncertainty, from the sense that someone might do something you didn't predict, that they might withhold approval, that they might withdraw access. Familiarity comes from knowing exactly how someone will respond. You've had the conversation where you explained how you felt about something, where you were clear and direct and honest about your emotions. The other person listened carefully. They nodded. They maybe even thanked you for sharing. Then they made the same decision they were going to make anyway. Not because they didn't hear you, because they did. They heard you completely. They understood your position. They accurately assessed how much it mattered to you. And they determined it didn't change anything. Because you already told them everything they needed to know. There was no mystery left. No risk of misreading you. No chance they were underestimating how much you cared. You gave them certainty. And certainty eliminates negotiation. When you're emotionally honest, people don't have to guess whether you'll stay or leave, whether you'll escalate or let it go, whether your boundary is real or performative. They already know, which means they've already decided how to respond. You've been in rooms where you spoke openly about something that mattered to you, where you made yourself clear, where you were direct about your feelings, and the room went quiet, not because people were moved, because they were filing it away. Then the conversation moved on, not cruelly, not dismissively, just efficiently, because once people know how you feel, they stop needing to keep you in suspense. They stop managing your expectations carefully. They stop worrying about misstepping. They know the terrain now. You are no longer unknown. And being unknown is the only reason people stay careful. You were taught that expressing your emotions is an act of courage, that being vulnerable creates intimacy, that honesty builds deeper relationships. It does create intimacy, but intimacy is not power. Intimacy is access. When people have access to your emotions, they have access to your thresholds. They know what hurts you. They know what excites you. They know what you'll tolerate and what you won't. They have a map. And a map tells you exactly how far you can push before something breaks. You thought emotional honesty would make people take you seriously. It made you predictable. You thought it would create respect. It created comfort. Comfort for them, not for you. Because now they know that when you're upset, you'll tell them. When something bothers you, you'll bring it up. When you disagree, you'll say so, which means they can stop scanning for signals. Stop interpreting silences. Stop second-guessing whether they've gone too far. You've already shown them where the line is. They don't have to wonder anymore. People are most attentive when they don't know what you're thinking, when they can't predict your reaction, when they're uncertain whether they still have your approval or your attention or your tolerance. Uncertainty creates vigilance. Expression removes it. You wanted to be seen. You are. You're seen clearly enough that people no longer feel the need to keep checking. If emotional honesty made you powerful, you wouldn't feel diminished after speaking.
Chapter 1. Emotional honesty was never about truth.
Emotional honesty is not about being accurate. It's about being legible. When you tell someone how you feel, you're not revealing some objective truth about reality. You're making a choice about what to disclose, what to name, what to hand over. And once you hand it over, it's no longer just yours. It becomes information someone else can use. You were taught that feelings are truth, that expressing them is an act of integrity, that keeping them private is dishonest or repressed or inauthentic. But feelings are not facts. They're signals, and signals can be read. When you're emotionally honest, you're not just sharing your inner world. You're making it available for interpretation, for assessment, for strategic use. You've done this at work. Someone asks how you're feeling about a project, about a decision, about a change in leadership, and you tell them, not because you think it will change anything, because you believe honesty is the right way to engage, because you were raised to think that withholding your feelings is a form of deception. So you're clear, you're direct, you explain what's bothering you, and they thank you for your honesty. Then they do exactly what they were planning to do, because they weren't asking to learn something new. They were asking to confirm what they already suspected. Your honesty didn't give them insight. It gave them confirmation. And confirmation is control, because now they don't have to guess. They don't have to prepare for multiple outcomes. They know exactly what you think and exactly how much it matters to you. You've removed the need for caution. Emotional honesty became a virtue because systems benefit from it. Not you. Systems. When employees are emotionally honest, managers don't have to interpret silence. They don't have to wonder if dissatisfaction is building quietly. They don't have to manage the risk of sudden departures or unexpected resistance. Everyone's position is clear, which makes everyone easier to manage. You were told this is good for you, that speaking up creates equity, that expressing yourself prevents resentment. But resentment isn't the problem. Leverage is. When you keep your dissatisfaction private, other people have to account for the possibility that it's worse than they think, that you might be closer to leaving than you've let on, that you might be less invested than you appear. They have to stay alert. The moment you tell them exactly how you feel, that alertness disappears. Not because they care less, because they know more. You've been in performance reviews where you were asked to share your concerns, your frustrations, your goals. You did. You were honest about what wasn't working, about what you wanted, about where you saw yourself going. And your manager listened carefully, took notes, nodded thoughtfully. Then the review ended and nothing changed. Not because they ignored you, because they cataloged you. They now know what will keep you satisfied, what will keep you from looking elsewhere, what minimum adjustments will prevent you from becoming a problem. You gave them a manual, and manuals exist to make things run efficiently, not powerfully, efficiently. When you're emotionally honest in relationships, the same thing happens. You tell someone what hurts you, what you need, what makes you feel close or distant, and they listen. They might even adjust their behavior for a while. But they're not adjusting because you've gained authority. They're adjusting because you've given them clarity. They know what to do to keep you, and they know what they can get away with, because you've already told them where the boundaries are. Boundaries that are stated lose their ambiguity. And ambiguity is the only thing that makes people stay careful after the conversation ends. You thought emotional honesty would make you harder to hurt. It made you easier to navigate. There's a phrase people use when someone is emotionally honest. They say that person is easy to talk to, not easy to respect, easy to talk to, because talking to someone who's emotionally open requires less effort. less calibration, less interpretation. You already know how they'll react. You already know what bothers them. You already know how far you can push before you hit resistance. You don't have to stay sharp. They've done the work of making themselves understandable. And once you're understandable, you're no longer a mystery. Mystery is what makes people lean in. Clarity is what makes them lean back. You've been in conversations where someone said, "Let me be honest with you." What follows is usually not insight. It's disclosure. They're about to tell you something that makes them feel vulnerable. Something they think will deepen the relationship. And it might. But depth is not the same as gravity. Gravity pulls. Depth just goes down. When you're emotionally honest, people know more about you. They understand you better. They feel closer to you. But they don't defer to you more. They don't reconsider their assumptions about you. They don't approach you with more caution. They approach you with more confidence. Because they've already seen the inside. You were praised for being open, for being self-aware, for being communicative. And you were. But praise is not position. You were thanked. You were valued. You were appreciated. But you were not prioritized. Because the people who get prioritized are not the ones who make themselves easy to understand. They're the ones who make others work to understand them. What you call honesty, others quietly store as information.
Chapter 2. Expression is information.
Every time you express an emotion, you hand someone data. Not just about how you feel in that moment. About how you work. What triggers you. What calms you. What makes you withdraw or escalate or fold. You think you're being honest. You're being studied. Not consciously. Not maliciously. But studied nonetheless. Because people don't just hear your words. They track your reactions. And reactions are patterns. Patterns are predictable. You've been in a meeting where someone challenged your idea. Not aggressively. Just directly. And you responded. Maybe you got defensive. Maybe you stayed calm, but your voice tightened. Maybe you over-explained. Maybe you withdrew. Whatever you did, someone noticed. Not what you said. How you reacted. And the next time they needed to challenge you, they knew exactly how much pressure to apply. Because you already showed them what happens when they push. Emotional reactions are not just expressions of feeling. They're behavioral signals. They tell people where your edges are. How much you'll tolerate before you break rhythm. How much criticism you'll absorb before you disengage. How much uncertainty you'll sit with before you need reassurance. Once people know those thresholds, they stop testing for them. They just use them. You thought being expressive made you real. It made you readable. There's a difference between being understood and being mapped. Understanding is mutual. Mapping is strategic. When someone understands you, they adjust their behavior to align with yours. When someone maps you, they adjust their behavior to manage yours. You felt this. You've been in conversations where you explained why something bothered you, where you were clear about your feelings, where you gave context and reasoning and emotional truth. And the other person listened carefully. Too carefully. Not because they were moved. Because they were learning. They were learning what upsets you. What you'll forgive. What you'll let slide and what you'll confront. They were learning how to handle you. And once someone knows how to handle you, they no longer need to respect you. Respect is what you give to people whose reactions you can't predict. Management is what you give to people whose reactions you can. You've done this yourself. There are people in your life whose emotional responses you know intimately. You know what will hurt them. You know what will make them anxious. You know what they need to hear when they're upset. And because you know, you stay calm around them. Not because you care less. Because you're no longer uncertain. You know the shape of their interior. You know how far you can go. You know what repair looks like if you overstep. You have a map. And maps remove the need for caution. When you're emotionally honest, you give people that same map of you. You tell them what matters. What doesn't. What you'll push back on. What you'll accept even if you don't like it. You think you're setting boundaries. You're showing people where the fence is. And once they know where the fence is, they know exactly how close they can get. Boundaries that are explained lose their ambiguity. Ambiguity is the only thing that keeps people guessing. You've been in situations where you expressed frustration and someone immediately started managing it. They didn't get defensive. They didn't argue. They just started soothing. Not because they respected your frustration. Because they recognized it. They've seen this reaction before. They know what it leads to. They know how to de-escalate it. Your honesty didn't make you more powerful. It made you more familiar. And familiarity doesn't generate caution. It generates confidence. When you explain why something hurt you, you're not just sharing pain. You're sharing the mechanism. Here's what I'm sensitive to. Here's what I can't tolerate. Here's what will make me pull away. You've given instructions. And instructions make people efficient. Not careful. Efficient. You thought emotional honesty would make people take you seriously. It made them comfortable. Because now they know the limits. They know what will upset you and what won't. They know how much they need to adjust and how much they can leave unchanged. You are no longer a risk. You're a known variable. There are people who never explain their emotions, who stay quiet when they're upset, who don't justify their distance, who don't clarify their disappointment. And people are more careful around them. Not because they're feared, because they're uncertain. No one knows exactly what bothers them. No one knows how much they'll tolerate. No one knows if their silence means indifference or something building. So people stay alert. They watch for shifts. They interpret small changes in tone or availability. They adjust their behavior preemptively because they don't want to discover the boundary by crossing it. Uncertainty creates vigilance. Expression ends it. You've seen this in how people talk to you versus how they talk to others. With you, they're relaxed. They're direct. They don't soften their words or check your reaction mid-sentence. Because they already know how you'll respond. You've been emotionally honest long enough that they've built a model of you. They know what you'll laugh at, what you'll get serious about, what you'll let go, and what you'll need to process. They don't have to stay tense. With other people, they're more careful. They measure their words. They pause to see how things land. Not because those people are more important, because they're less predictable. And unpredictability requires attention. You want it to be easy to understand. You are. So easy that people no longer need to work to stay on your good side. Because they already know what your good side looks like. You've been in moments where you felt handled. Where someone responded to your emotion in a way that felt too smooth. Too practiced. Too immediate. Like they'd already prepared for this. And they had. Not because they planned the conversation. Because they've mapped your responses. They know that when you're upset, you need to talk it through. Or that you need space. Or that you need acknowledgement before you can move forward. They've seen the pattern. So they don't panic when you're emotional. They don't scramble. They don't recalibrate. They just execute. And execution is not respect. It's efficiency. You thought being open would make people value you more. It made them need you less. Because needing someone means depending on their unknowability. On the chance they might withhold something. On the possibility that you've miscalculated their tolerance. When someone is emotionally honest, that need dissolves. You already know what they'll give, what they'll forgive, what they'll endure. There's no mystery left. And without mystery, there's no tension. Without tension, there's no pull. Every time you explain how you feel, you shorten the distance between your interior and their assessment. You make yourself easier to approach, easier to manage, easier to move past. Once someone knows how you react, they no longer need to respect you.
Chapter 3. Why being open makes you easy to handle.
Openness feels like strength. It feels like you're being brave. Like you're refusing to hide. Like you're making yourself available for real connection. And you are making yourself available. That's the problem. When you're emotionally open, people don't have to work to understand you. They don't have to interpret your silence. They don't have to decode your distance. They don't have to wonder if they've upset you or lost your interest. You've already told them. And once they know, they relax. Not because they trust you more. Because they have to manage you less. You are no longer a source of friction. And friction is what creates weight. When there is resistance, people slow down. They adjust their approach. They consider your position more carefully because moving past you requires effort. When there is no resistance, they keep moving. Not around you. Through you. You've been praised for being a good communicator. For being open. For being someone people can talk to. And they do talk to you. They share things with you. They ask for your input. They value your perspective. But they don't defer to you. They don't check with you before making decisions. They don't wait for your approval. They don't adjust their plans to account for your position. Because they already know your position. You've made it clear. So they can factor you in without slowing down. You are included. But you are not considered. There's a difference between being liked and being deferred to. Being liked means people enjoy your presence. They appreciate your warmth. They value your honesty. Being deferred to means people alter their behavior to account for you. They hesitate before acting. They wonder if they've miscalculated your limits. Openness makes you likable. It does not make you heavy. You've been in rooms where decisions were made and you weren't consulted. Not because you were excluded, because your position was already known. Someone probably said, "We already know how they feel about this." And they did, because you told them. So there was no need to pause. No need to bring you in. No need to check if circumstances had changed or if your tolerance had shifted. You were predictable, and predictable people get bypassed. Not with hostility, with efficiency. When you're emotionally open, people finish your sentences. Not because they're rude, because they've heard the pattern enough times that they know where it's going. They know what bothers you. They know what you'll object to. They know what compromises you'll accept. They've built a model of you, and models don't need to be consulted. They just need to be accurate. You thought being open would make you indispensable. It made you easy to route around. Because indispensable people create uncertainty. You don't know what they're thinking. You don't know if they'll stay or leave. You don't know if their patience has limits you haven't discovered yet. So you keep them close. You check in. You make sure you haven't lost their support. Open people don't create that uncertainty. You already know where they stand, which means you already know how to proceed without them. There are people in your life who are harder to read, who don't explain themselves, who don't clarify their emotions, who stay quiet when something bothers them. And you're more careful around those people. You watch for cues. You interpret tone. You adjust your behavior because you're not sure where the line is. You can't afford to assume. With emotionally open people, you can afford to assume, because they've already shown you everything. You've been in conversations where someone asked how you were doing and you told them. You were honest about what was hard, about what was overwhelming you, about where you were struggling, and they listened. Then they made a decision that didn't account for any of it. Not because they didn't care, because they didn't need to adjust. You gave them all the information. They assessed it. They determined it wasn't a barrier. Your honesty didn't change their behavior. It just confirmed they could proceed. When you're open about your limits, people know how much they can ask of you. When you're open about your frustrations, people know what you'll tolerate anyway. When you're open about your needs, people know what they can deprioritize. You've made yourself manageable. And manageable people don't get navigated carefully. They get guided. You felt this. Someone steering you toward a conclusion. Someone framing a situation in a way that accounts for your emotions, but leads you where they wanted you to go anyway. Not through force, through fluency. They know you well enough to guide you smoothly. That's not intimacy. That's infrastructure. You thought emotional openness would make people respect your boundaries. It made them confident about how far they could go. Because boundaries that are stated are boundaries that are tested. Not always crossed, but tested. People know exactly where the edge is. They know how much pressure it takes before you reinforce it. They know whether your boundary is firm or flexible. You've given them a blueprint. And blueprints don't inspire caution. They inspire precision. When you're emotionally open, people don't wonder if they've pushed too far. They know. They can see it in real time. They can hear it in your voice. They can feel it in the shift of your tone. They don't have to guess. And when people don't have to guess, they stop being tentative. They stop second-guessing themselves. They stop worrying that they've misread the situation. They move with confidence. Not because they dominate you, because they understand you. And understanding removes hesitation. You wanted openness to create respect. It created comfort. Comfort for them. They don't have to stay alert around you. They don't have to interpret your silence. They don't have to wonder if they've miscalculated. You've already given them everything they need to move forward. Without friction, without resistance, without weight. They don't need to dominate you. They know how to move around you.
The cost you never calculated.
You were told emotional honesty was courage. That being vulnerable was strength. That openness created connection and clarity and respect. And it did create something, just not power. Emotional honesty was never about courage. It was about accessibility. You made yourself available, understandable, easy to approach, and people appreciated it. They praised you for it. They valued it. They rewarded you with warmth and validation and closeness. But warmth is not leverage. Validation is not position. Closeness is not influence. You gave people access to your interior. You let them see what moves you, what hurts you, what you care about. And they used it. Not maliciously, not even consciously, but they used it. Because information is always used. Once someone knows how you feel, they know how to move. They know what will work on you and what won't. They know where to apply pressure and where to ease off. They know you. And being known is not the same as being respected. You thought transparency would make you harder to dismiss. It made you easier to predict. You thought vulnerability would create intimacy that deepened your relationships. It created familiarity that flattened them. You thought honesty would protect you from being misunderstood. It protected other people from having to guess. You traded mystery for clarity. And clarity benefits the person receiving it, not the person giving it. You've spent years being the open one, the honest one, the person who doesn't play games or hide their feelings. And it cost you, not in obvious ways, not in dramatic losses, in position, in the quiet recalibration of how people treat you, in the way your words carry less weight over time, in the realization that people like you but don't defer to you, that they include you but don't wait for you, that they value you but don't need you, because you've already given them everything they need to move forward without you. You remove the friction, and friction is what makes people slow down. You thought being emotionally honest was the brave thing to do. It was the convenient thing, convenient for everyone else. Because now they don't have to work to understand you. They don't have to interpret your signals. They don't have to stay uncertain about where you stand. You've done that work for them. You've made yourself easy. And easy doesn't generate respect. It generates relief. People feel relieved around you. Comfortable. Unburdened. They don't have to manage the tension of not knowing. They don't have to navigate carefully. They don't have to second-guess whether they've overstepped. You've already told them where the lines are, so they can move freely, not around you, through the space you've created by being so accessible. You were rewarded for emotional honesty with validation. Not power, not influence, not position, validation. And validation is what you give to people you want to keep comfortable, not people you're afraid to lose. You might think this means the answer is to hide your feelings, to suppress your emotions, to become closed off and unreadable. That would be a different mistake, because the issue is not expression, it's exposure. At this point, you might think the solution is to feel nothing. That would be a mistake.
Chapter 4. Emotional honesty removes tension.
Tension is not the same as conflict. Conflict is opposition. Tension is uncertainty. Conflict creates friction. Tension creates attention. And attention is what pulls people toward you. When someone doesn't know what you're thinking, they stay oriented to you. They watch for cues. They listen more carefully. They try to read between the lines. Not because they're anxious, because they're engaged. They have to stay active in the interaction. They can't relax. They can't assume. They can't predict what's coming next. So they pay attention. The moment you explain how you feel, that attention dissolves. Not immediately, not completely, but it dissolves. Because explanation is release. You've been in conversations where something felt unresolved, where there was weight in the room, where people were choosing their words carefully. Then someone explained what they were feeling. They were honest. They were clear. They laid out exactly what was bothering them. And the room exhaled. People nodded. They understood. They knew what they were dealing with now. The tension broke. And with it, the pull. Because tension doesn't come from not understanding. It comes from not knowing. Once you know, you can settle. You can stop scanning for signals. You can stop interpreting. You can stop wondering if there's something underneath the surface. The surface is all there is now. Clarity feels good. Power doesn't need it. You thought being clear would make people take you more seriously. It made them relax. Not in a good way. Not in a way that deepened the relationship. In a way that released them from having to stay sharp. You've seen this in how conversations end after you've been emotionally honest. You explain how you feel. The other person listens. They acknowledge it. Then the conversation ends faster than you expected. Not because they're dismissing you. Because they're done. They have what they needed. They understand the situation now. There's no more ambiguity to navigate. So they move on. And you're left with the strange feeling that something should have shifted but didn't. That's because resolution doesn't create weight. It removes it. When you explain your emotions, you give people a conclusion. Here's what I feel. Here's why. Here's what it means. They don't have to sit with the uncertainty anymore. They don't have to wonder if they've misjudged the situation. They don't have to hold space for the possibility that there's more you're not saying. You've said it all, and now they can let go. Relief ends influence. You've felt this in relationships where you were the one who always communicated clearly, where you didn't let things fester, where you brought up problems as soon as you noticed them, and your honesty was appreciated. But over time, the other person stopped checking in, not because they cared less, because they didn't need to. They knew you'd tell them if something was wrong. So they stopped scanning your mood. They stopped interpreting your silence. They stopped wondering if you were upset. They just waited for you to say something. And when you didn't, they assumed everything was fine. Your honesty trained them to stop paying attention until you prompted them. You created a system where your feelings only mattered once you voiced them, which means your feelings only mattered on someone else's timeline. Silence creates pressure. Words release it. When you stay quiet, people have to interpret. They have to guess. They have to consider the possibility that something is wrong even if you're not saying it. They have to stay uncertain. And uncertainty keeps people engaged. When you speak, that engagement evaporates. Because now they know. And knowing allows them to relax their vigilance. You thought silence was passive. It's not. Silence makes people work. It forces them to stay attentive, to watch for shifts, to wonder if they've missed something. They can't afford to assume with you, because you haven't told them what's safe to assume. You've been in situations where someone was quiet after a disagreement. Not angry, not withdrawn, just quiet. And you couldn't settle. You kept replaying the conversation. You kept wondering if you'd gone too far. You kept checking their tone for clues. They didn't have to explain that they were upset. Their silence made you do the work. And that work kept you oriented toward them. When you're emotionally honest, you remove that orientation. People don't have to wonder. They don't have to interpret. They don't have to stay activated. You've done the work for them. And once the work is done, the attention fades. Being understood is not being taken seriously. Being understood means people have successfully categorized you. They know what you care about. They know what bothers you. They know what you'll react to and what you'll let pass. You're no longer a question. You're an answer. And answers don't hold attention the way questions do. You've been in meetings where you explained your position clearly. You were articulate. You were logical. You made your reasoning transparent. And people understood. Then they made a different decision anyway. Not because they didn't hear you. Because they did. They understood your position completely. They assessed it accurately. They determined it wasn't compelling enough to change course. Your clarity didn't create influence. It created closure. Because once people understand your reasoning, they can decide whether it matters. And if it doesn't, they move on. Without guilt. Without hesitation. Because you've already shown them everything. There's nothing left to discover. Tension doesn't come from misunderstanding. It comes from the possibility of misunderstanding. When people aren't sure they've interpreted you correctly, they stay cautious. They hedge. They qualify. They leave room for the chance that they've missed something. When you explain yourself, you remove that room. You've told them exactly what they need to know. So they can stop hedging. They can act with confidence. And confidence doesn't defer. It proceeds. Every time you explain how you feel, the room exhales. And then it moves on without you.
Chapter 5. Why Powerful People Reveal Less.
Watch how people with authority respond to criticism. They don't explain themselves. They don't justify. They don't defend. They don't clarify their intentions or correct misunderstandings. They stay quiet. Not because they're hiding. Because they don't need to respond. And that silence does something. It forces other people to sit with their own interpretation. To wonder if they've misjudged the situation. To second-guess whether their criticism landed or missed entirely. The lack of response creates a gap. And gaps create discomfort. People want confirmation that they've been heard. That their words had impact. That they registered. When someone with authority doesn't give them that confirmation, they're left uncertain. Did it matter? Did it not? Are they being dismissed, or are they being ignored, or is something else happening beneath the surface? They don't know, and not knowing keeps them oriented. You've seen this. Someone challenges a person in power, publicly, directly, and the person in power doesn't engage. They don't get defensive. They don't explain. They don't correct the record. They just move forward. And the person who challenged them is left holding the criticism in the air with no resolution. That lack of resolution doesn't make the powerful person look weak. It makes them look unbothered. And unbothered is a form of mass. It suggests that the criticism wasn't heavy enough to make them shift position. You've tried this yourself, and it didn't work the same way. When you were criticized, you responded. You explained your reasoning. You clarified your intentions. You defended your position. And the criticism continued. Because you engaged with it. You gave it weight by treating it as something that required a response. When you respond to criticism, you validate that it reached you. When you stay silent, people have to wonder if it did. Powerful people do not narrate their inner states. They don't tell you what they're thinking. They don't explain what they're feeling. They don't give you access to the process behind their decisions. You see the outcome, not the reasoning, and that creates distance. Distance is not coldness. It's insulation. It prevents people from getting close enough to test the edges, from finding the weak points, from discovering what moves you and what doesn't. You thought being transparent would make you trustworthy. It made you penetrable, because transparency removes the buffer between your interior and other people's assessment. They can see directly into how you work, what bothers you, what you prioritize. And once they can see it, they can navigate it. Powerful people don't let you navigate them. They make you deal with the surface, and the surface gives nothing away. You've been in meetings with people who have authority. Someone asks them a direct question, something that would require them to reveal their position or their reasoning or their feelings about a situation, and they don't answer it. Not rudely, not evasively. They just redirect. They reframe the question. They shift the focus. They give an answer that doesn't actually address what was asked. And no one pushes, because pushing would require them to acknowledge that they didn't get an answer. And acknowledging that feels like admitting they don't have access. So they let it go. And the person with authority stays unrevealed. That's not deception. It's containment. Containment is what happens when you hold your position without explaining it. When you make a decision without justifying it. When you withhold approval without clarifying why. People are forced to interpret. And interpretation keeps them engaged longer than explanation ever does. When you explain, people stop thinking. They have the answer. They can move on. When you don't explain, they keep turning it over. They keep trying to figure out what you meant, what you want, what would satisfy you. They stay oriented to you, not because they admire you, because they're uncertain about you. And uncertainty generates attention. You were taught that authority comes from being respected. It comes from being unreadable. Respect is what people feel when they can't predict you, when they don't know how far they can push, when they don't know if you'll tolerate something or shut it down, when they don't know what you're thinking. You've made yourself too easy to read. You've explained your values. You've clarified your boundaries. You've shared your reasoning. And now people know exactly how to interact with you. They know what you'll accept, what you'll object to, what you'll let slide. They don't have to stay careful, because you've already shown them where the limits are. Powerful people don't show you the limits. They let you discover them. And discovery is costly. It requires testing. And testing requires risk. Most people don't test when they're uncertain about the cost. They just stay cautious. You've been in situations where someone was upset and you weren't sure why. They didn't explain. They didn't tell you what you did wrong. They just pulled back. And you couldn't settle. You kept replaying interactions. Kept wondering what shifted. Kept trying to figure out where you lost them. Their silence made you do the work. And that work kept you activated. When you're emotionally honest, you remove that activation. You tell people exactly what upset you. Exactly what they did. Exactly what needs to change. And they can stop wondering. They know now. So they can decide if they care enough to adjust. And if they don't, they move on without the weight of uncertainty. You thought honesty would make people accountable. It gave them clarity about whether accountability mattered. Silence doesn't mean absence. It means withholding. And withholding creates pressure. When someone withholds their reaction, you don't know if they're unbothered or if they're calculating. You don't know if they've dismissed you or if they're deciding how to respond. You don't know if you're safe or if something is building. That ambiguity keeps you alert. Powerful people understand this. They don't react immediately. They don't clarify in real time. They don't reassure you that everything is fine. They let you sit with the uncertainty. And uncertainty makes people careful. You've been in rooms where someone in authority was challenged and didn't respond. The room didn't relax. It tightened. because no one knew what the silence meant, and not knowing made everyone recalibrate. They became more careful with their words, more cautious about what they said next, more aware that they might have misjudged the situation. The silence didn't make the person in authority look defensive. It made everyone else look exposed, because they revealed their position and got nothing back. That asymmetry is power. You give nothing. They give everything. You stay unrevealed. They stay wondering. You were told that openness creates connection. It does. But connection is not authority. Authority requires distance. Not emotional distance. Structural distance. The distance that comes from being harder to read, harder to predict, harder to manage. You shortened that distance. You made yourself accessible, understandable, available. And accessibility does not generate deference. It generates comfort. People are comfortable around you, not because they trust you more, because they have to work less. Powerful people make you work. They make you interpret. They make you guess. They make you wonder if you've positioned yourself correctly. They don't hand you clarity. You have to earn it. And earning it keeps you engaged. You've done the opposite. You've handed people clarity freely. You've told them how you feel, what you think, where you stand. And they stopped working to understand you, because you already did the work for them. Revelation shortens distance. Distance creates gravity. When people have to reach to understand you, they lean in. When you come to them with explanation, they lean back, because they don't need to move. You've already moved toward them. Power is not built by being known. It is built by being unreadable, not unknowable, unreadable. People can interact with you. They can work with you. They can engage with you. But they can't map you. They can't predict how you'll respond. They can't anticipate your limits. They can't be certain they understand your position. So they stay attentive. They watch for cues. They adjust their behavior preemptively. They treat you like someone who might react in ways they haven't accounted for. You wanted to be understood. Powerful people don't. They want to be dealt with carefully. And careful treatment comes from uncertainty, not from clarity. They are not hiding. They are holding.
Chapter 6. Oversharing is a signal.
Oversharing is not honesty. It's boundary collapse. When you share more than the situation requires, you're not being authentic. You're signaling that you don't know where the line is. And people notice. Not consciously, not immediately, but they notice. Because sharing too much creates discomfort. Not the discomfort of intimacy. The discomfort of witnessing someone give away more than they should. You've been in conversations where someone shared personal details that didn't match the context, where they told you about their struggles, their fears, their disappointments, and you didn't ask. You listened. You nodded. You maybe even said something supportive. But internally, you adjusted your assessment of them, not because you judged them for what they shared, because they shared it too easily. They made themselves available in a way that didn't require you to earn it. And when access is free, it's worth less. You've done this yourself. You've been in professional settings and shared personal context. You thought it made you relatable, that it humanized you, that it helped people understand where you were coming from. And maybe it did, but it also lowered your position, because personal information in professional spaces creates familiarity. And familiarity is not the same as respect. Respect comes from boundaries that are felt but not explained. Familiarity comes from boundaries that don't exist. When you overshare, you're telling people that you don't distinguish between contexts. That what you tell a close friend, you'll also tell a colleague, or a new acquaintance, or someone you barely know. You're signaling that your interior is available to anyone who's willing to listen. And availability is not intimacy. It's exposure. You thought being open would create closeness. It created access. And access lowers the cost of interacting with you. When someone has to work to get close to you, that closeness has weight. They invested something. They earned something. When you hand closeness to them freely, it becomes casual, not special, not earned, just available. You've been thanked for sharing. People said they appreciated your honesty, your vulnerability, your willingness to be real. And they meant it. But appreciation is not deference. You were valued for making yourself easy to understand, not for making yourself difficult to dismiss. There's a reason powerful people don't share personal stories in professional contexts. Not because they don't have them, because personal stories shift the frame. They turn you from a position into a person. And people interact with persons differently than they interact with positions. Persons can be related to, sympathized with, managed. Positions have to be navigated. When you share too much, you turn yourself into someone people can relate to. And once they relate to you, they stop treating you as someone they need to account for. You've seen this in how people talk to you after you've shared something personal. They're warmer. They're more casual. They feel comfortable making assumptions about you. Not because they're closer to you, because you've lowered the barrier. You've told them it's okay to approach you without formality. And they do. But informal access does not create influence. It creates familiarity. And familiar people don't get deferred to. They get included. They get liked. They get consulted when it's convenient. But they don't shape decisions. Because shaping decisions requires weight. And weight comes from distance. Not emotional distance. Structural distance. The distance that makes people uncertain about how to interact with you. Whether they can be casual. Whether they need to stay professional. Whether their assumptions about you are safe. When you overshare, you remove that uncertainty. You've told them exactly who you are. What you care about. What you've been through. They don't have to wonder anymore. And when people don't have to wonder, they stop being careful. You've shared emotional context that no one asked for. You thought it would help people understand your decisions. It gave them a way to dismiss your decisions. Because now they don't just have your position. They have your reasoning. And reasoning can be evaluated. When you explain why you feel the way you do, you give people the opportunity to decide if your feelings are justified. When you just hold your position without explaining it, they have to accept it as it is. You've been in situations where you explained why something mattered to you. You gave context. You shared your history with it. You made your emotional investment clear. And people listened. Then they made a different choice anyway. Because they evaluated your reasoning and decided it wasn't compelling enough. If you hadn't explained, they would have just had to deal with your position. But you gave them your interior. And your interior became something they could assess. Oversharing doesn't make you vulnerable. It makes you manageable. Because now people know how to interact with you without risking misunderstanding. They know what you're sensitive to. They know what you value. They know what will make you feel heard even if nothing changes. They have instructions. And instructions make interactions efficient. Not meaningful. Efficient. You want it to be real. You are. So real that people no longer have to work to figure you out. You've done the work for them. And now they can interact with you casually. Without effort. Without uncertainty. Without the sense that they might be misreading you. You are always available emotionally. And because you're always available, you're never prioritized. Because priority goes to people who create scarcity. Who make access feel valuable. Who make people wonder if they've lost ground. You don't create scarcity. You create abundance. And abundance does not generate urgency. You've been ignored after sharing something deeply personal. Not cruelly. Just practically. People acknowledged what you said. They maybe even thanked you. Then they moved on. Because your sharing didn't change anything structurally. It just made you more knowable. And being knowable is not the same as being valued. Being valued means people adjust their behavior to keep you engaged. Being knowable means people already understand you well enough that they don't need to adjust. Oversharing is not intimacy. It's a signal that you don't know how to hold position. That you'll give away access before it's earned. That you'll make yourself available before people have demonstrated they deserve it. And people respond to that signal. Not by getting closer, by getting comfortable. If you are always available emotionally, you are never valued structurally.
Chapter 7. Control is not suppression.
There's a difference between not feeling and not leaking. Suppression kills feeling. Control holds it. When you suppress an emotion, you try to make it stop existing. You push it down. You deny it. You refuse to acknowledge that it's there. And it doesn't go away. It just becomes background pressure. Something you carry without processing. Something that leaks out in ways you don't intend. In tension. In irritability. In reactions that feel disproportionate to what triggered them. Suppression doesn't create strength. It creates instability. Because emotions don't disappear when you ignore them. They just stop being legible to you. Which means you stop being able to manage them. Control is different. Control is feeling something fully and choosing not to express it. Not because you're afraid of it. Because you've decided it doesn't serve you to release it. You know the feeling is there. You can name it. You can sit with it. You just don't hand it to someone else. That's not numbness. That's discipline. You felt anger and stayed quiet. Not because you were suppressing it, because you were holding it. You felt it completely. You knew exactly what triggered it. You could have expressed it clearly if you'd chosen to, but you didn't. Because expressing it would have given the other person information. It would have shown them what got to you, what moved you, what made you react. And that information would have become leverage. So you held it. Not forever. Not in a way that made it fester. Just long enough that the other person didn't get to see it. That's control. And control creates weight. Because people can sense that something is being held. They can feel that you're not reacting the way they expected. That you're not giving them the confirmation they were looking for. And that absence of reaction makes them uncertain. They don't know if they missed, if they didn't land, if you're unbothered, or if you're just not showing it. That uncertainty keeps them engaged. When you react immediately, you remove the uncertainty. You show them exactly what worked, what got through, what matters to you. And now they know. When you hold your reaction, they have to guess. And guessing requires more attention than knowing. You thought emotional control meant not feeling. It means feeling without leaking. Leaking is what happens when your emotions become visible before you've decided to show them. When your voice tightens, when your posture shifts, when your face gives something away. You're not choosing to express. You're failing to contain. And failure to contain is not honesty. It's lack of discipline. Discipline is internal structure. It's the ability to feel something intensely and still choose how and when and whether to let it show. Not because you're afraid of your emotions. Because you understand that expression is a choice. And choices have consequences. When you express every emotion as it arises, you're not being authentic. You're being reactive. And reactive people are easy to manage. Because their responses are predictable. Their triggers are visible. Their thresholds are known. You can map them just by watching what makes them react. Controlled people are harder to map. They might feel the same things, but you can't tell by looking. They don't give you the feedback you're scanning for. So you have to stay uncertain. You have to wonder if what you said registered. If it mattered. If you've miscalculated. And that wondering keeps you careful. You've been in conversations where you felt criticized and didn't react. Not because you didn't feel it. Because you chose not to show it. You heard what was said. You processed it. You felt the sting of it. But you didn't correct. You didn't defend. You didn't explain. You just stayed still. And the person who criticized you couldn't tell if it landed. They kept talking. Maybe they softened their tone. Maybe they added context. Maybe they backtracked slightly. Because your lack of reaction made them uncertain about whether they'd gone too far. Your control created ambiguity. And ambiguity made them work harder. If you'd reacted immediately, they would have known exactly where they stood. They would have seen that they got to you. That their words had impact. And they could have moved on confidently. Your stillness kept them activated. Control is not about being unfeeling. It's about being selective. Selective about what you show. When you show it, who gets to see it? Not everything you feel needs to be expressed. Not because feelings are shameful. Because expression is a form of giving. And giving should be intentional. When you give someone access to your emotions freely, you're telling them that access is cheap. That they don't have to earn it. That it's just available. And things that are freely available don't get valued. They get used. You've shared how you feel and watched people adjust their behavior just enough to keep you manageable. Not enough to actually change anything. Just enough to make you feel heard. Because they didn't need to do more than that. You already told them exactly what it would take to keep you from escalating. You gave them the minimum threshold. And people will meet the minimum when they know what it is. When you hold your emotions, people don't know what the minimum is. They don't know what it will take to keep you. What will make you withdraw? What will make you stop tolerating something? So they have to aim higher. Not because they're more generous. Because they're more uncertain. Control doesn't mean you never express. It means you choose when expression serves you. And most of the time, it doesn't. Most of the time, expression just gives other people clarity about how to navigate you. You've been praised for emotional control, and it felt like an insult. Like people were saying you were cold, or distant, or hard to read. And you were hard to read. That's not a flaw. That's position. Being hard to read means people have to work to understand you. They have to pay attention. They have to interpret. They have to stay engaged longer than they would if you just told them everything. And that engagement is influence. Not the kind that comes from being liked. The kind that comes from being accounted for. You wanted to be understood. Controlled people don't prioritize being understood. They prioritize being effective. And effectiveness doesn't come from making yourself transparent. It comes from making people uncertain about what you'll do next. Suppression makes you unstable. Control makes you unreadable. And unreadable people don't get managed. They get navigated carefully. Not everything you feel needs to be released.
Chapter 8. Why People Test Those Who Share.
When you're emotionally open, people test you more. Not obviously, not aggressively, but they test. They say things that are slightly too direct. They make comments that brush up against your boundaries. They push just a little to see what happens. Because you've already shown them that you're reachable. And reachable people get tested. Testing is not hostility. It's calibration. People are trying to figure out where the real limits are. Not the limits you've stated. The limits you'll actually enforce. Because stating a boundary and enforcing it are not the same thing. You've told people what bothers you. And then they did it anyway. Not to hurt you. To see if you meant it. To see if you'd bring it up again. If you'd get upset. If you'd pull back. If you'd do anything. And when you didn't, they learned something. They learned that your boundary was a preference, not a line. That you'd tolerate it if they didn't make it too obvious. If they framed it as a joke. If they acted like they forgot. You were tested, and you didn't hold. So they kept pushing. Not because they don't respect you. Because they know they can. When you share openly, you give people a map of what to test. You've told them what you're sensitive to. What you care about. What upsets you. And now they know exactly where to apply pressure. Not necessarily to harm you. Just to see what moves. You've been in conversations where someone made a comment that was just on the edge. Something that referenced something you'd shared. Something that felt slightly too personal for the context. And you didn't say anything. Maybe you laughed it off. Maybe you let it pass. Maybe you told yourself it wasn't a big deal. But you felt it. And they saw that you felt it. Which told them they could do it again. Because you didn't correct them. You didn't create a consequence. You just absorbed it. And absorption is permission. People test where they feel access. When someone is emotionally closed, you don't know what will bother them. So you stay cautious. You avoid saying things that might land wrong. You keep your comments neutral. Because testing someone whose limits you don't know is risky. When someone is emotionally open, you know exactly what will bother them. So testing feels safer. Because you already know what the reaction will be. You know they'll get quiet. Or they'll explain how they feel. Or they'll tell you it hurt. But they won't do anything that costs you. So the test is low risk. You've been called sensitive. Not as an observation. As a dismissal. Because you reacted to something. Because you expressed that something bothered you. And instead of adjusting their behavior, they adjusted their assessment of you. They decided you were too sensitive. Too reactive. Too much. And once they decided that, they stopped treating your reactions as valid. They treated them as your problem. You created that opening. Not by being sensitive. By showing them what you were sensitive to. When you don't show people what bothers you, they can't use it against you. They can't frame your reaction as oversensitivity. They can't dismiss it as you being emotional. Because they don't have enough data. They're left wondering if they actually crossed a line. If they misread the situation. If they just damaged something without realizing it. That wondering makes them careful. When you've already told them what crosses the line, that wondering disappears. They know the line. They know they crossed it. They know you noticed. And they're watching to see what you do about it. Most of the time, you do nothing. You express discomfort. You maybe ask them not to do it again. But you don't create a real consequence. You don't withdraw. You don't change how you interact with them. You don't make them uncertain about whether they still have access to you. So they learn that testing you is safe. That your boundaries are negotiable. That your discomfort is something you'll manage on your own. And once they learn that, the testing continues. Not constantly, just periodically. Enough to remind both of you that they can. You've been in groups where someone made a joke at your expense. Not a cruel joke. Just something that referenced something you'd shared. Something you'd been vulnerable about. And everyone laughed. Including you. Because not laughing would have made it awkward. Would have made you look like you couldn't take a joke. So you laughed. And that laugh told everyone in the room that it was okay to joke about that thing. That your vulnerability was now public material. That it could be referenced casually. That you'd absorb it. You thought sharing would create empathy. It created material. People don't test closed people the same way. They don't make jokes about things they don't know. They don't reference vulnerabilities that haven't been disclosed. Not because they're more respectful, because they don't have the information. They don't know what will land, what will hurt, what will make you pull back. So they stay careful. You remove that carefulness. You gave them everything they needed to test you comfortably. And comfortable testing is constant testing. You've had people disguise tests as concern. They ask how you're doing with something you shared. They bring it up in contexts where it doesn't belong. They frame it as checking in. But they're not checking in. They're checking if it still bothers you. If you're still sensitive about it. If it's still a pressure point. And every time you engage with that question, you confirm that it is. You confirm that they can access that part of you whenever they want. That your interior is available for casual inquiry. When you don't share, people can't disguise tests as concern. Because they don't know what to be concerned about. They can't reference something you haven't given them. They can't probe something they don't know exists. So they're left with surface-level interactions. And surface-level interactions don't create vulnerability. They create distance. And distance is protection. You wanted closeness. You got exposure. And exposure invites testing. Because people need to know if what you've shown them is the whole picture. If there's more underneath. If you'll hold your position or collapse under pressure. They need to know if you're serious. And the only way to know is to test. You've been tested in small ways constantly. Comments that dismiss what you've said. Requests that ignore boundaries you've stated. Behavior that repeats patterns you've asked people to stop. Not because they forgot. Because they're testing if you meant it. If you'll bring it up again. If you'll enforce it. If you'll do anything other than tolerate it. Most of the time, you tolerate it. Because doing something else feels too confrontational. Too much. Too difficult to navigate. So you let it go. And every time you let it go, they learn that testing you is safe. That your words don't predict your actions. That your boundaries are more like guidelines. That you'll express discomfort, but you won't create consequences. And without consequences, boundaries are just information. Information about where they can push. How far they can go. What they can get away with. You gave them that information freely. And now they use it. Not with malice. With efficiency. Because you made yourself easy to test. And easy targets get tested constantly. Not to destroy you. Just to see what moves. They test you because you made yourself reachable.
Chapter 9. When Honesty Turns into Self-Negotiation.
You started explaining yourself before anyone asked. You softened your statements mid-sentence. You added context before context was needed. You apologized for your tone before anyone said it was a problem. You thought you were being clear. You were negotiating. Not with the other person. With yourself. You were already deciding that what you felt wasn't enough on its own. That it needed justification. That it required explanation to be valid. And that negotiation showed. It showed in how you spoke. In how you framed your position. In how you shrank your presence to make room for the possibility that you were wrong. You don't lose power when you feel something. You lose it when you explain it. Because explanation is not clarity. It is surrender of position. When you state something without explanation, it exists as fact. This is how I feel. This is what I think. This is where I stand. The moment you start explaining why, you've shifted the frame. Now your position is no longer a fact. It's an argument. And arguments can be evaluated, disputed, dismissed. You've been in conversations where you said something direct, then immediately softened it. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But it just feels like. You didn't even wait for pushback. You preemptively undermined yourself. Because somewhere in the process of becoming emotionally honest, you started believing that your feelings needed to be justified to be valid. That you had to prove you had a right to feel what you felt. And once you start proving, you've already lost. Because the person listening isn't hearing your position anymore. They're evaluating your reasoning. And reasoning can always be found insufficient. You thought adding context would make people understand. It gave them permission to disagree. When you explain why something bothers you, you're opening a negotiation. You're saying, here's my feeling, and here's why it's reasonable. And the other person gets to decide if they agree that it's reasonable. If your explanation convinces them, they might adjust. If it doesn't, they won't. But either way, you've made your feeling conditional. Conditional on whether your reasoning holds up, whether your context justifies it, whether someone else validates it. Your feeling is no longer yours. It's something that requires external approval to matter. You've apologized for your tone in the middle of saying something important. Sorry, I don't mean to sound harsh, but you weren't harsh. You were direct, but you apologized anyway. Because you've trained yourself to believe that having a strong position requires an apology. That clarity needs to be softened. That firmness is aggression unless you preemptively defuse it. So you negotiate with yourself in real time. You say something, then you take it back slightly. Then you rebuild it with more padding. And what starts as a clear statement becomes a diluted version of itself. Not because someone challenged you, because you challenged yourself before they could. That's not emotional honesty. That's emotional apologizing. You're apologizing for taking up space, for having a position, for asking someone to adjust to you instead of adjusting to them first. And people hear that apology. They hear that you're not sure your position is valid, that you're open to being talked out of it, that you'll negotiate it down if they push back even slightly. So they don't take your first words seriously. They wait for the negotiation, for the part where you soften, for the moment when you reveal that what you said wasn't actually firm. And you always give them that moment. You filled silence with explanation. Someone didn't respond immediately, so you kept talking. You added context. You clarified. You made sure they understood what you meant. But they already understood. They were just deciding how much it mattered. And your need to fill the silence told them it didn't matter much. Because if it mattered, you would have let it sit. You would have let them feel the weight of what you said. Let them sit with the discomfort of not knowing how to respond. But you couldn't tolerate that discomfort. So you dissolved it with more words. And more words always dilute the original statement. You thought you were being helpful, that you were making things easier to understand. You were making it easier to dismiss. Because every additional word gave them something to focus on other than your actual position. They could focus on your tone, your reasoning, your context, anything except the fact that you said something that required a response. You've watched people who don't explain themselves, who say something once and then stop. No softening, no context, no apology, just the statement. And silence. And that silence does something. It makes the other person work. It makes them sit with what was said. It makes them respond to the actual position instead of the explanation. Because there is no explanation to dismantle, just the thing itself. And the thing itself is harder to dismiss than the reasoning behind it. You've negotiated yourself down before anyone else could. You've taken your own position and made it smaller, more conditional, more dependent on external validation. Not because someone forced you to, because you believe that's what emotional honesty required. That feelings needed to be justified. That positions needed to be explained. That strength needed to apologize for itself. But strength doesn't apologize. Weakness does. And not the weakness of feeling. The weakness of not trusting that feeling enough to let it stand alone. You've added so many disclaimers to your statements that the original point gets lost. I could be wrong, but I don't know if this makes sense, but maybe it's just me, but every disclaimer is a preemptive retreat. It's you telling the other person that you're not fully committed to what you're about to say, that they can disregard it without consequence, that you won't hold your ground if they push back. And they hear that. They hear that your words are negotiable, that your position is flexible, that you've already started compromising before the conversation even began. So they don't have to take you seriously. You've already signaled that you don't take yourself seriously. You thought emotional honesty meant explaining everything. It doesn't. It means knowing what you feel and choosing whether to express it, not explaining it, not justifying it, not apologizing for it, just expressing it or not. And when you do express it, doing it once, clearly, without negotiation, then stopping. Because the moment you start explaining, you've shifted from expression to defense. And defense is not a position of power. It's a position of justification. You justify when you're not sure you have the right to your position. When you believe someone else's comfort matters more than your boundary. When you've been taught that feelings are only valid if they can be proven reasonable. But feelings are not reasonable. They're not unreasonable either. They just are. And the moment you try to make them reasonable, you've made them debatable. You've turned your interior into something that can be assessed and judged and found wanting. You thought explanation would make people respect your feelings. It made them evaluate your feelings. And evaluation is not respect. Respect is when someone adjusts their behavior without needing to understand why. Evaluation is when someone decides whether your feelings justify their adjustment. You wanted respect. You got evaluation. An evaluation always ends with someone deciding whether you've made a good enough case. The more you explain yourself, the less seriously your first words are taken.
Chapter 10. Emotional discipline replaces expression.
Discipline is not about controlling others. It's about controlling what escapes you, what you let show, what you let out, what you allow to become visible before you've decided it should be. Most people think discipline means suppression. It doesn't. Suppression is trying to make a feeling stop existing. Discipline is feeling it fully and choosing not to release it. The feeling is there. You know it's there. You can name it. You just don't hand it to someone else. That's not numbness. That's structure. Structure is what keeps your emotions from leaking out in ways you don't control. From showing in your voice when you didn't mean to show it. From tightening your posture when you wanted to stay neutral. From betraying irritation before you decided whether irritation was useful. You've had moments where you felt something intensely and stayed still. Not because you were hiding, because you were holding. Holding is active. Hiding is passive. Hiding is hoping no one notices what you feel. Holding is deciding that what you feel stays inside until you choose otherwise. And what stays inside keeps its weight, because it's not being dissipated through expression. It's not being released through explanation. It's not being drained through constant narration. It's contained, and containment creates density. You've been in conflict and felt anger rise. You knew exactly what you wanted to say. You could feel the words forming. You could imagine the release of saying them. But you didn't. Not because you were afraid. Because you chose not to. You held the anger. You let it sit. You felt its full weight without letting it dictate your response. And that holding did something. It kept you from giving the other person information. They didn't get to see what got to you. What moved you? What made you react? They had to deal with your stillness instead. And stillness is harder to navigate than reaction. Because reaction gives feedback. Stillness gives nothing. When you react, people know they've landed. They know what works. They know they've found the edge. When you hold, they're left guessing. Did it land? Did it not? Are you unbothered or just not showing it? They don't know. And not knowing keeps them careful. Discipline is not about never expressing. It's about selective visibility. Choosing what gets seen, what gets shared, what gets released. Not based on what you feel, based on what serves you. Some emotions serve you by being expressed. Most don't. Most emotions serve you more by being held, by staying internal, by creating weight without being explained, by existing as something people can sense but not map. You've spoken without emotional explanation. You said what needed to be said, then stopped. No context about how you felt. No justification for why you felt it. No softening to make it easier to hear. Just the statement. And the person listening had to deal with the statement itself. Not your feelings about it. Not your reasoning behind it. Just the thing you said. And that made it heavier. Because there was nothing to dismantle except the statement itself. No emotional scaffolding they could pick apart. No reasoning they could dispute. No context they could reframe. Just your position. Standing alone. Discipline creates that aloneness. It strips away everything except what you've chosen to make visible. And what you've chosen to make visible has more weight because it's not diluted by everything underneath it. You've held emotion in situations where expressing it would have felt good, where releasing it would have given you immediate relief. But relief is not power. Relief is discharge. And discharge removes tension. Tension is what keeps people paying attention. When you hold emotion, you keep the tension active. The other person can feel that something is there. They can sense weight. They can tell that something hasn't been said. But they don't know what. And not knowing makes them stay engaged longer than release ever would. Because release gives closure. Holding keeps things open. And open means unresolved. Unresolved means people can't move on cleanly. They have to keep checking. Keep wondering. Keep recalibrating. Because they're not sure where they stand. You thought expressing emotions created intimacy. It created certainty. And certainty allows people to relax their attention. Discipline creates uncertainty. Not hostile uncertainty. Structural uncertainty. The kind that makes people stay alert because they're not sure what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you've decided. They have to keep paying attention. Not because you're demanding it, Because you're not giving them enough information to stop. You've chosen silence when words would have felt natural. Someone said something that invited response, that created space for you to explain or clarify or share. And you didn't fill it. You let the silence sit. And that silence did more than words would have. It created weight. It made the other person uncomfortable. It forced them to sit with what they'd said without the relief of your response. You didn't give them confirmation that they'd been heard, or understood, or forgiven. You just stayed quiet. And that quiet became its own statement. Not absence. Presence. The presence of something being held. You've been praised for emotional control and felt misunderstood. Like people thought you didn't feel things. Like they thought you were cold or detached. But you felt everything. You just didn't leak it. And not leaking is not the same as not feeling. It's choosing to keep what you feel internal until it serves you to make it external. That's discipline. And discipline is not coldness. It's structure. Structure doesn't eliminate emotion. It contains it. It keeps emotion from escaping in ways that weaken your position. From showing up as defensiveness when you meant to stay neutral. From leaking as frustration when you meant to stay measured. From becoming visible before you decided it should be. Discipline means you choose. Not whether to feel, whether to show. And showing should be rare. Not because feelings are shameful. Because visibility is costly. Every time you make something visible, you've given it away. It's no longer just yours. It's information someone else can use. To navigate you. To predict you. To manage you. When you keep it inside, it stays yours. And what stays yours keeps its power. Not everything that is real needs to be revealed.
Chapter 11. Why Silence Changes How You Are Treated.
When you stop explaining yourself, people adjust. Not immediately. Not obviously. But they adjust. They stop testing as much. They stop assuming as much. They stop treating your words like the beginning of a negotiation. Because you've changed the terms. You're no longer giving them constant access to your interior. You're not clarifying every feeling. You're not justifying every position. You're not filling every silence with explanation. You're just present. And that presence has weight. Not the weight that comes from being loud. The weight that comes from being dense. From taking up space without apologizing for it. From holding position without defending it. From existing without constant narration. People feel that weight. They feel it in how conversations slow when you're in them. Not because you're dominating. Because you're not rushing to fill space. You let pauses sit. You let statements land. You let silence do the work that words used to do. And that changes how people talk to you. They interrupt you less. Not because you've asked them to. Because interrupting you feels different now. Before, interrupting felt easy. You were already talking so much that one more voice didn't change anything. Now, when you speak, there's space around your words. And interrupting that space feels like intrusion. So people wait. They wait for you to finish. They wait to see if you'll say more. They wait to make sure the silence is actually an opening and not just a pause. That waiting is deference. Not the kind you demand. The kind you create by not giving people constant access. You didn't become more important. You became less available. And less availability makes people more careful. Here's what people don't say out loud. They notice when you stop over-explaining. They notice when you stop softening your statements. When you stop apologizing for your tone. When you stop filling silence with context. They notice that you've changed the rhythm. And that noticing makes them recalibrate. They can't interact with you the same way anymore. Because the openings they used to rely on aren't there. The places where they could interrupt. Where they could redirect. Where they could dismiss what you said by focusing on how you said it. Those places have closed. Not aggressively. Just structurally. You're not giving them the same entry points. So they have to engage with what you're actually saying instead of how you're delivering it. And what you're actually saying carries more weight now. Because it's not buried under explanation. It's not softened by apology. It's not diluted by overclarification. It's just there. And there means people have to deal with it directly. You've been in rooms where your words landed differently than they used to. You said something simple. Something direct. And people paused. Not because what you said was profound. Because you didn't undercut it. You didn't add maybe I'm wrong or I don't know if this makes sense or does that make sense. You just said it. And stopped. And that stopping created a moment where people had to sit with what you said. They couldn't immediately move past it. They couldn't reframe it. They couldn't soften it for you. It just sat there, waiting for them to respond to it. And responding to it required more effort than responding to your old pattern did. Because your old pattern gave them so many options, they could focus on your tone, your uncertainty, your willingness to be talked out of your position. Now they only have the position itself. And the position itself is harder to dismiss. People don't feel closer to you now. They feel you more. There's a difference. Closeness comes from access, from knowing someone's interior, from understanding how they work. Feeling someone comes from presence, from the sense that they take up space in a way that can't be ignored. You used to give people closeness. Now you give them presence. And presence doesn't invite casual interaction. It invites consideration. People consider you more now, not because they like you more, because they're less certain about you. They're less certain what you're thinking, what you'll tolerate, what you'll do if they push. That uncertainty makes them careful. They don't make assumptions as freely. They don't speak as casually. They don't test as often, because testing feels riskier when they don't know what the response will be. You've stopped giving them constant feedback. You used to react to everything. You used to show what bothered you. You used to explain what you needed. Now you're selective. Some things you respond to, some things you don't. And they can't tell which is which until it happens. That unpredictability creates alertness. They have to pay attention now. They have to watch for cues. They have to interpret your silence. They have to wonder if they've crossed something without realizing it. They can't relax around you the way they used to, because you're no longer predictable. You used to be easy to read, easy to navigate, easy to manage. Now you're contained. And contained people require more careful handling. Not because they're hostile, because they're opaque. You can't see through them easily. You can't map them quickly. You can't assume you know what they're thinking. You have to actually engage. And engagement takes effort. Effort that most people didn't have to spend on you before. You've noticed that conversations feel different. People don't finish your sentences anymore. They used to. They knew your patterns well enough that they could predict where you were going. Now they can't, because you don't follow the same patterns. You don't soften. You don't apologize. You don't negotiate with yourself out loud. You just state things. And stating things without scaffolding makes them harder to predict. So people have to listen all the way through. They can't tune out halfway because they think they already know what you're saying. They have to stay present, because you're not giving them enough filler to let them drift. You didn't become colder. You became less accessible. And less accessible feels like more. More weight, more presence, more consideration. Not because you're doing more, because you're leaking less. And what doesn't leak stays dense. You didn't become colder. You became less accessible.
Final, honesty was never the point.
You were told emotional honesty was courage. That being open made you strong. That expressing yourself created respect. And you believed it. Because it sounded right. Because everyone said it. Because the alternative sounded like repression. But emotional honesty was never about courage. It was about access. Access to your interior. Access to your limits. Access to what moves you and what doesn't. And access is what other people use to navigate you. Not to hurt you. Not even consciously. Just to know where you are. What you'll tolerate. What you'll forgive. What you'll let slide. To know how to interact with you without risk. Without uncertainty. Without the need to stay careful. You gave them that access freely. You thought it was intimacy. It was information. You thought it was connection. It was mapping. You thought it made you real. It made you readable. And readable people don't generate caution. They generate comfort. Comfort for everyone else. Because now they know. They know how you work. They know what bothers you. They know what you need to hear to feel validated. They know you. And being known removed the one thing that made people stay alert around you. Uncertainty. Uncertainty is leverage. When people don't know what you're thinking, they have to stay careful. When they don't know your limits, they have to stay cautious. When they don't know if they've lost ground with you, they have to keep checking. You removed that uncertainty. You told them everything. You explained everything. You made everything visible. And visibility eliminated leverage. Power didn't disappear suddenly. It eroded. In small moments. In the way people stopped checking with you before making decisions. In the way your words carried less weight over time. In the way you were included but not considered. In the quiet recalibration of how you were treated. Not with cruelty. With efficiency. Because you made yourself easy to manage. And easy people don't get deferred to. They get moved around. You were praised for being open, for being communicative, for being real. And you were those things. But praise is not position. You were liked. You were valued. You were appreciated. But you were not powerful. Because power doesn't come from expression. It comes from containment. From holding what you feel without leaking it. From choosing what gets seen and what stays internal. From creating the kind of uncertainty that makes people work to understand you. You thought being real would make you strong. Being real made you available. And availability is not strength. Containment is. Once you see the cost, emotional honesty stops feeling virtuous and starts feeling expensive.